Welcome everybody to our Why Try webinar. Really happy to be back with you. Been a couple weeks. Happy to have everybody on here. I hope everybody's having a good February. This is an interesting time of year for those of you that are in education. This is where we're kind of gearing up. You've got spring break right around the corner, and then it's basically a marathon sprint to the finish line. After that, you're potentially sneaking in end of year testing and all the good stuff. So this is a busy time of year, and we certainly appreciate everybody that hops on here live with us. My name's Jason Johnson. I will be your webinar moderator. I represent the Why Try organization, and I'm very excited for the discussion we're going to be having today with some return panelists. Before I do that, just a couple notes on the webinar. We have been doing these webinars since 2020. I'm right near, I tallied them up the other day. I will hit number 100 of these here within the next few that I do. So it's been there. We've been doing a lot of these over the last 5 years, and they've been really fun. They've turned into I think, a really great community. I love seeing familiar faces, or familiar names, I should say. Some of the faces I know that I've met in person at various training events throughout the country, but really fun to see familiar people show up and also to meet new people through this. So we are on a webinar link, which means myself and my panelists are the only ones with live cameras and microphones. The rest of you that are in attendance are going to be attending as observers, but we do have a live chat that is part of it. I'll talk more about that in a minute. We're scheduled to go for about an hour today, give or take, depending on how the pacing of the conversation goes. And then just a brief introduction on the organization that hosts these. I represent the Why Try organization. My background is I'm a school psychologist, come from the world of public education, came over as the director of training about a decade ago for the Why Try organization. And we have a resilience model and a resilience toolkit. We've been around for about 20 years, and we help educators and mental health professionals teach the skills of resilience in a practical and an engaging way. In the process, we've built up a really nice network of just the best people that we get to hang out with and communicate with and have webinars like this with, and today's no exception. Before I introduce my panelists, let me just give one note on the chat. So I mentioned we have a live chat. One thing that is helpful is if you have your chat set up so that other people can see your comments. The way you can check and make sure it's set up properly so that other people can see your comments is right above. If you open up the chat box, right above where you type a message, it says to, and then there's a little drop down menu where you can select who you're sharing your message with. That should say to everyone. If that says anything other than to everyone, not everybody's going to be able to see your comments. So go ahead and make that adjustment. Make sure that says to everyone. And then let's just go with our usual emoji check-in. After you've made that adjustment, go ahead and type an emoji into the chat that expresses how your February is going so far. Give us an emoji to represent where you're at this February. I feel them all. Oh no. Yeah, this is I think we got them. I think we got them all. We covered it all. So much to explore in just in the emoji responses, right? Well, as I mentioned, thank you for showing up. For those that are feeling overwhelmed or feeling like things are getting a little crazy, or if your February's been discouraging for any reason, hopefully today will be a nice little pick-me-up. And I think we've got some great discussion that has some real practical use for you. The topic that we're going to be covering, the title of the webinar we have is Dysregulation in the Classroom, what it is, what it looks like, what we can do about it. And I'm very happy to have my two guests on today. This is your third time. You're officially in the three timers club for Why Try webinars by being back with us. We'll have to see if there's like a jacket or something that comes with that. But very thrilled to introduce our panelists. They represent the neurosequential model in education. I'll have them introduce that a little bit more in just a minute. But I have with me Dr. Katie Lohmiller. They're both, Katie and Haley are both program directors for the neurosequential model in education. Dr. Lohmiller is one of the co-founders of the Educational Access Group with a background in public health, passion for systems level change, brings a unique lens to the implementation of trauma-informed and brain-based practices in education, has spent years helping schools and youth serving organizations navigate the intersection of neuroscience, policy, and equity as a program coordinator for sustainable science-backed environments where regulation and resilience can flourish, deeply committed to helping school communities translate brain science into real-world impact for students and staff alike. Welcome, Katie. So happy to have you back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I'm so excited.
We also have with us Haley Gruber, also a co-founder of the Educational Access Group. Haley brings the heart of a classroom teacher and the mind of a systems thinker to her work, supporting schools across the country with roots in elementary education. Knows firsthand the challenges educators face and the incredible potential for healing and growth within every classroom. As a program coordinator with the Neurosequential Network and co-founder of the Educational Access Group, Haley partners with educators to embed trauma-informed, brain-based strategies into daily practice. Her mission is to help schools become more joyful, connected, and developmentally attuned spaces for every student and adult who walks through the doors. Haley, Katie, welcome. So happy to have you back.
Thank you.
We're happy to be here.
My name's Jason Johnson. As I mentioned, I'm the director of training for the Why Try organization. I also get the opportunity to lead and moderate these webinars, which is one of my very favorite things I get to do. Prior to being the director of training, I worked as a school psychologist in the largest school district in my home state of Utah. Was published on research I did on the topic of resilience, and I'm very passionate about the topic of resilience, which seems to intersect with most of the discussions that we have here, and it certainly is at the core of the Why Try approach that we present to people. So that rounds out our panel. So with that, I want to jump right into it. And we're going to be talking dysregulation, which is kind of a big term. Before we dig into that term, wondering, Haley and Katie, if one or both of you can give us just like a 3-minute intro to your organization and your model. I know we'll have some people on here today that are likely unfamiliar with the neurosequential model in education. And so give us just a little base primer for what it is, what it does, and kind of what you bring to that. And I think that'll set us up nicely to then dig into dysregulation from there.
I love it. Opening with what we bring to the table. Hopefully a lot. So we're coming to you from the Neurosequential Network. So this is, Dr. Bruce Perry, if you're familiar with his work, this is his organization. And the Neurosequential Network actually has, reach into the therapeutic world, the sports world, the educational setting, and it all tracks back to the brain. So Dr. Perry's work is around the brain. And what Haley and I have the privilege of doing is directing the neurosequential model in education. So that is the branch of the Neurosequential Network that focuses on educators and educational systems and youth serving organizations. So day in and day out, what that looks like is the network offers training, support, connection, collaboration around brain-based approaches. It stemmed from that therapeutic work, but really, people that were attending those therapeutic trainings that Dr. Perry was doing early on said, we want to see this in the other lanes of our life. And he had great information that was easily, shared, easily taught. And so we get the privilege of teaching, his great research and science on the daily basis, and then being able to share across our network the great things that are happening by educators with educators every day.
Our goal is basically to take the brain, which our objective in education is to shift, support, change, reinforce the brain, right? Whether that's a social skill or an emotional skill, behavioral, whatever it is, that's our goal in education, is to interact with the brain. So the neurosequential network and the science that underpins all of our work says if we want to change and work with the brain, we need to understand it a little bit. So as an educator, this was, I always joke that it was like the clouds parting and the sun shining down on me, not only for dealing with dysregulation and behavior, but also for dealing with myself and my coworkers and my small group reading lessons. So it's about brains and how we can best support ours and others.
I love it. And I think it's a real, when we talk big picture about brain science, it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming. But one of the things I've continually been impressed as I've been able to collaborate with you both on this model is there is a real practical and I guess understandable element to this that just makes really good logical sense, and I'm excited for you to be able to share. I also feel obligated to address one other thing: the fact that you're both in the same room, sharing a camera, and have a unique ability to finish one another's sentences if necessary. We should just say it, right? You happen to be not just coworkers but also sisters, correct?
Assigned from birth.
Yeah. Katie always jokes our working relationship started 30 some odd years ago.
Well, it's effective. I love it, and it's fun to always be able to have you together like this. So let's get into the topic at hand. Let's talk dysregulation. I think a lot of people have like a rough big picture idea of what it is, but perhaps they may not know like some of the finer points of it. Maybe talk a little bit about that term and that concept of dysregulation, what it means, and particularly what it means within the neurosequential model for you, and what it represents as far as what's happening in our brain or our kiddos' brains in those moments of dysregulation.
Yeah. So when we refer to dysregulation, or sort of the other side of that coin, regulation, which I would say are two of our big vocab terms in the neurosequential model, and probably in everyone's sort of educational setting these days, we like to talk about it as balance, right? So we use this motion often, but just that the human brain and body is always seeking balance, and when we're out of balance, we are dysregulated. And so we talk a lot about stress in the neurosequential network. We love stress. Humans need stress. We just need the right amount of stress for the right amount of time in order to build skills and resilience. What happens is we have too much stress or too much challenge for too long of time without the appropriate support, and that tips us out of balance, therefore into a state of dysregulation. So this could be Katie on her way to work in the morning, dumps her coffee in her lap and is running late. And that puts her out of balance, right? This is a true story from basically every year of her life. That puts her out of balance. This could also be a child who is living in a house with chaos and interpersonal violence. That's going to put them out of balance. The beauty of the neurosequential model in education is that we really focus on, I can tell you're dysregulated. I don't necessarily have to know the why behind your dysregulation, because we never want resources, supports, or scaffolds to be sort of hinged on disclosure, versus in the neurosequential model of therapeutics, it is really much more of this idea of what has happened to you, what is sort of that developmental experience that might lead you to this place of more clinical dysregulation, whatever that is. But we really focus on saying there are some ways that people let us know they are dysregulated. And if we can understand what that does to the brain and the body, how that shifts our functioning, our cognition, our relational skills, we're better able to try to bring either ourselves or others back into balance. Lately, I think we have been focusing much more on like organizational or entire environments, or like dysregulated ecosystems. So we, similar to, I feel like a lot of those emojis are speaking to me, where it's like dysregulation face. We just recently sort of surveyed our community, and everyone was like, it's February in education. We are crazy face emoji right now.
And it could be good. It could be, negative. That dysregulation can come from novelty. It can come from excitement. It can come from, again, just doses of challenge coming in.
Yeah.
This is awesome. So I'm as you're talking, and this is why I love talking to both of you because you always my brain immediately just starts spinning. So immediately for me, because like when I talk resilience, sometimes it's a similar thing. Like we talk big picture resilience, we grasp the big picture idea, but a lot of times the question is like, well, what are the signs of a lack of resilience? And a lack of resilience may overlap realistically with like dysregulation. Like in moments of severe dysregulation, I suspect that resilience may suffer. So one of the questions I'll get, or the I'll even like think myself, is like, what is the eye test? How can I visually observe that resilience is suffering? I want to ask the same question regarding dysregulation. I suspect a lot of the eye test is like behaviors, like common behaviors or behavioral challenges that we see. What is the eye test, or what are the behaviors that we see as a result of dysregulation? And is there the possibility that those can sometimes even be misinterpreted within that lens?
Yeah.
It's kind of $1 million question, right?
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say, even the asking about what is the test, which we need, and there we have an answer for that. But I'll jump to the second part, which is to say, we as adults, or the people in power, or the people gauging that situation, often our lens comes in pretty quickly to categorize, right? So we see a behavior, and our brain gets the privilege of deciding, is that dysregulation, or is that defiance, or is that good, or is that bad? And so I love the first part of your question, because it gets at the fact that some of the ways we show dysregulation are based, I mean, all of them are going to be based on our experience and what we've practiced and what we've had the capacity to do. And that might not always track with what others have done when they're dysregulated, or what makes sense to their brains, which can in itself lead to sort of a cascade of effects.
I think there's like, some really traditional, like you were saying, Jason, markers of dysregulation behavior. I think for every sort of, outward behavior, there's also the more dissociative or inward response. What's tricky is oftentimes dysregulation can look like compliance, right? So being able to mimic someone else's behavior is a great way to keep yourself safe. And many times the behavior we exhibit when we're dysregulated is something we've practiced in other environments that's kept us safe. So a child who knows when I'm in class and the teacher makes me feel nervous, I mimic what my seat partner is doing, because I know that's going to keep me under the radar. It's going to keep me safe. But it doesn't mean I'm engaging in academic, processing and storing. Now, as a teacher, that's really hard. I always, I'm a broken record. I'm like, my student who was really outwardly dysregulated, yelled at me, tossed something, really, ran out of the classroom. That was much easier for me to deal with, because I was like, you are dysregulated, right? Something has you out of balance in this moment. Now we shift to students who go more inward, who are more compliant. It's hard to say, are they learning? Are they dysregulated? Or things like humor. For a lot of educators, depending on your lens on humor, is that dysregulation? Is that being the class clown? Having these power struggles, I think that is something where the more dysregulated people get, the more out of balance we are, the more we try to take back some power where we can, as adults, as youth, as humans. And so sometimes we don't always understand how someone is trying to take their power back. So one of the things with dysregulation, and why, I said that's kind of the $1 million question, is because how I dysregulate looks very different than how Katie dysregulates. And we've had literally almost an identical developmental experience. But life has had us, organized in our brains differently, and we're different people. What's cool is some of the science of regulation says if we understand how human brains process and store information and go through this sequential engagement of regulate, relate, reason, even if they dysregulate differently, there's a chance we can regulate them through some similar activities. And so we really focus on trying to be proactive versus asking educators to scan and serve 25 to 30 different students with different styles of regulation, which is really tricky. It also allows for a ton of bias, which is not an educator's fault. It is just certain types of dysregulation will catch our eye, or for me, trigger me and put me into a more dysregulated state than others.
Yep. And we've heard a lot lately of students who have really masterfully realized if they delve into academics, if they do struggle with social or they struggle with environmental, that's where they don't have that resilience. They haven't built that capacity. They can go under the radar a long time if they look super academic, if they're a reader or if they're a school kid. And that's not always what our brain tracks to when we think about dysregulation. But educators who have this lens
are rarely upset with the silent reader.
Yes, exactly.
Stop reading so peacefully in the corner, right? Like, cause a little chaos, please.
So it makes me wonder then, and I think I could guess, but I'm always curious because you're on the front lines. You go out and you train educators on this. What's the feedback you get? Like, what are the most common or the most disruptive behavioral challenges that educators are witnessing in their classroom that they're coming to you saying, this is the thing I need help with?
I think we're seeing some real age level patterns.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yep.
So we are seeing in our younger grade bands a lot more outward dysregulation, sort of lack of, so maybe not lack, but coping skills or sort of self-regulation skills at a different level than expected, and more shutdown and dysregulation through disengagement with our older students.
Yeah, I think classic kids eloping. I think at the younger, still just they won't engage. They're leaving the class. That kind of thing. And then with those older students, I do think, that pattern of I won't engage, or this is making me uncomfortable, whether the adults are reading it that way or not. When we sort of peel it back, whether it's access, shame, practice behavior, that sort of refusal to engage or participate or take things a different way.
And our school system set that up. The older you get, the easier it is to opt out. You can ditch, you can unenroll yourself. You can bury yourself in technology. You can, a lot of times our system has asked you to leave school at that point if you haven't built those skills, so you're no longer welcome back. So it does make sense that we see that. I think the developmental lag that educators are naming, I shouldn't say lag, mismatch. The developmental mismatch. So some kids are reading far above grade level. Some are reading well below grade level. Some have wildly mature social skills. Others we're really starting at the baseline. I think educators are naming that the developmental array in their classrooms is greater than they have dealt with in years previous.
Let's stick with that theme for a minute. I'm going to circle back because I think there is two sides to regulation and dysregulation. There's the student regulation, dysregulation. There's the grown-up regulation, dysregulation. I want to circle back to the grown-up side in just a minute. But before we do that, I think you put us in a good direction on this idea that I want to explore further. So schools are built on age-based expectations. Like we have grade level milestones that we have traditionally worked towards. But students may not and may frequently not have the emotional or behavioral skills that we assume that they should have in order to kind of meet those developmental moments. So how does that gap show up in classrooms? What are you seeing, especially because the thing with those developmental gaps, and it's no different from an academic standpoint to a behavioral standpoint, if there's a delay or if the development is going slower than normal, that gap tends to get bigger and bigger the older they get. Like if I'm a couple months behind in first grade, but I stay on that pace while my age expectations are outpacing me by the time I get into high school, rather than being a couple months behind, I might be a couple years behind. So what are you seeing as far as I guess just talk a little bit more about that developmental gap and the impact that you're seeing with
I think, if we were to sort of go to the students first, I think what we're seeing is a level of frustration, access being blocked, and coping skills sort of rising to the top. So older students who are there, the challenging thing about getting older is you get more self-aware of whether you want to or not, right? So again, a first grader who's a little bit different than their peers in those developmental milestones may not be as aware as a 15-year-old or a 12-year-old. So I think we see shame come onto the sort of playing field almost immediately in those older grades. And we know something that dysregulates us immensely is shame. So I think a lot of behaviors we quickly see with older students is that they've figured out how not to look dumb. I don't want to look embarrassed. I don't want to look dumb. I don't want to, or they've just realized school is not they've identified as maybe not being as successful in school. So it's not a setting they're coming into with this sort of efficacy or safety. And so they're already a little bit more sensitized than a peer. So I think at the older level, we're seeing that, but we're also seeing to acknowledge all the great things adults are doing, that when adults are able to meet students and say, we'll meet you where you're at, and we're going to build those skills sequentially, whether you're, 12 years old or 2 years old, we see uptake happens. Those older students are still building those skills. I imagine with Y-Try, you see this a lot, that when you're able to say, let's meet them where they are and build those skills, it's happening. But I think what students are stuck in with the adults is that there's more than one kid in each room, or there's more than one level. So the adults are in those older grades really have to be in a place where they're regulated and supported enough that they can feel safe and comfortable to say, I'm going to teach Haley some skills that may not traditionally fall into my teaching purview, but it's going to be good for the whole class. We're going to start here and scaffold up. But that takes an adult who has, who feels confident, who feels supported, who has the bandwidth for that.
I also just think we know building skills is done better when it's paired with something we feel good about, when it's rewarding. And so taking the time to identify that all of our students are so talented in so many different ways, it doesn't always mean that they have the skill in the exact setting we want them to, or perhaps we haven't set up an environment where they're able to showcase their skills. And so I think it takes sort of time to slow down and say, how can we make getting developmentally sort of caught up or on par with whomever we think you need to be on par with? How can we make that a rewarding experience and honor what you're already so talented at doing, or those skills you've had to develop because you lived a harder life or whatever that might be, So I think our system is just not always designed to hunt for skills and then use those to build. And I think that is something we're always trying to leverage with the neurosequential model is there are always skills, there are always strengths. And if we can take those and leverage them, it's going to be easier to build other skills. That asks a lot of educators if the system is not in that same mentality.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'll circle back. I'll share towards the end of this. This is a thing we've really emphasized in Y-Try. It's really easy for us to identify challenges. Like if I say, what's bugging you? What's making class hard? You can list the challenges. I think it's even fairly easy to list the strengths. Like what strengths do you need from your students? But the skills sometimes I think are the harder part to really make concrete. But we've found it's made it much more effective for us to help people teach resilience if you can break resilience down into the specific skills. Then we can say, I need to teach this skill and I'm going to align this skill up with this challenge. And I suspect dysregulation probably operates the same way. Like if you can teach the skills of regulation, identify the skills, and then align those skills up with the challenges that you're trying to meet, then it makes, I think, a little more concrete model for educators and mental health professionals to be able to delve into this.
100%. We always liken it to reading. Reading is reading, math, they're very sequential. You build this skill, you identify letters, now you identify letter sounds, now you build words, sentences, paragraphs, now you're a reader. And we don't skip that. Even if we have a 16-year-old who doesn't know how to read, we don't just say like, well, at 16, we're not going to do phonics and letter sounds, just learn to read. We recognize that there is a sequence we have to respect in the acquisition of literacy. And that's very much how we approach behavior. And before we can really self-regulate, we have to have some kind of primary attachment. We have to have an external force that's helping us regulate or modeling regulation, or, supporting that co-regulation so that we are able to self-regulate. And so it's backing those things up. And I think we've heard from a lot of educators some of the things that used to be couched as soft skills, they are realizing are no longer soft skills, right? They are the sequential building blocks on which our academics and our relational and other cognitive skills are built. And for the adults just as well too, right? I think we are seeing educators have to regulate themselves through situations and scenarios that don't feel like something they maybe have the training or the support to deal with. And so supporting that in them as well.
But that, I would just tag on to that does track back to planning. And, I love research, I love data. And I think it's very easy to say, like, learn self-regulation. I have people all the time that these kids need to work on self-regulation, or we need to work on our own self-regulation. And that sentence flows off the tongue, but I'm like, what, I think of myself, what does that mean? How do I even realize when my shoulders are stuck to my ears? That's probably the first step to know I even need to regulate. And so I think that's where we can see a classroom teacher, an interventionist, or an entire school look at their data to say, what behaviors are we seeing? What reactivity are we seeing? What do those moments of dysregulation look like? And instead of waiting till then and then sort of turning to each other and saying, like, oh my gosh, how do we regulate little Haley, or how do we regulate our system? Because we know those moments will come. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter, is saying, how are we building that into our practices, or how have we practiced for those moments so that we can execute it when it's time, and it's not this novel thing, because novelty is stressful. So how are we practicing for those and giving people the time to think, if this happened, what would I do? Like you were just saying, if I want resilience, what does that actually mean skill-wise? And then if I don't know how to build those skills, that's totally fine. Everyone doesn't have to come to the table with that in their toolbox. But then who do I look to, or who's going to come model in my room for me to show me how?
Really smart. I'm curious. I want to get kind of the tone of the chat right now. What are this message is or question is to everybody listening in the chat? Just type into the chat. What are the big behaviors that you're dealing with right now, that you're having to deal with or confront, that you think may be a result or connected to dysregulation? Just throw them in the chat. Hit us with the ones that are really making things complicated for you. Elopement, defiance, aggression, shutdowns and aggression, property destruction, refusal, pretending to sleep, classic one. Some actors are better than others when it comes to that, right? Lack of motivation is a huge one. Loss of a loved one, mother's passed away. 9-year-old child spitting on teachers. Apathy is a big one. Apathy is one of the really tricky ones. Lack of maturity, yelling, eloping, ditching school, hitting, kicking. Yeah, we're seeing all the big ones.
Yeah.
Grief, volatility, shutting down, disrespect, defiance, off-task behavior, anger, hitting, kicking, avoidance, lack of motivation, disrespect, defiance, throwing, disrespect, shame, embarrassment. I was glad you mentioned humor. It really made me think about like my use of it and how humor really is this regulation. Like I use it. If I feel nervous, I'm dysregulated. Nervousness or stress is an indication of dysregulation. And so the humor somehow in my mind, I think it levels the playing field. It either makes me feel like everybody else has kind of like come down to my level a little bit if I get the right laugh, or it makes me feel a little bit more like empowered to share my next thing. But it's fascinating. Let's bring a little bit of concreteness to the discussion. I've heard you mention, and I'm interested if you're willing to share a little bit. I know you have some acronyms like we have in other places. You have a model, I believe. Do I have it right? The 6 R's. Do I have the right number of R's? Tell us about the 6 R's as a lens for understanding behavior and engagement. And I suspect it's something most of the people on here will not intuitively be familiar with, but probably have some interest after you share.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about the 6 R's is I imagine as we go through them, though educators are a humble crowd, if we asked all of you who are listening, watching, to identify what makes you good at your job, your best class period, your best lesson. For me, it was always like morning meeting. The 6 R's will be present. So we always say that these are sort of the elements we use to understand great teachers or to demystify teacher magic. So while, yeah, this might not be the name you've used for it before, these will feel familiar to your practice. But before we do that, I would just say, so if, you can do a thumbs up or a thumbs down in the chat, but I'll really quickly name something. And if you think it's regulating, you could do a thumbs up. If you think it's dysregulating, you could do a thumbs down. But let's say getting a hug from a coworker, regulating or dysregulating?
Do this.
I don't want Katie to hug me. I can be honest about that. Yeah. Rosalia's good with it. Okay. A lot of people are good with it. If we were in person, I am sure depends. I was just going to say, someone would say depends. That person, yeah, shock face. Okay, here's another one.
I was going to say, can I speak on behalf of those of us that have large personal space bubbles?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So Jason's like, that would not, we are siblings, but like if I were to reach over and hug Katie, do you see she literally recoiled, and I showered recently. Okay. So another one, listening to music, regulating or dysregulating. We know we're talking, is this Metallica? Is this Taylor Swift? How do we decide? Depends. So the reason that we do this before we talk about the 6 R's, the other one that we always put in there is like working out or going on a run. And some people are like, yes. And if you're me, I'm like, never in my life have I been regulated by running. Like I've heard about runner's high. I've never found it. It's horrible, but for other people, it's good. So the reason we do that is because the point of this is that there are thousands, millions of ways to regulate people, but they're incredibly individual, right? Jason's not trying to get a hug. Katie is also not trying to get a hug, but there are people out there who would benefit from getting a hug when they're stressed out. There are people who want to run when they're stressed out. Sounds like you have some of them in your schools eloping around the building. And so the reason we really love the 6 R's is because just giving educators a curriculum of here's how to regulate kids, make them all lift weights, right? Go to Alexis, you're all going to lift weights together. That will regulate some people, right? Katie will just Hulk out with you. Other people, that is going to be extremely painful and dysregulating. And so the reason we love the 6 R's is because instead of just expecting one yoga ball or one deep breathing activity to be the answer, which I think further frustrates educators, we use the 6 R's to say there is probably a right tool at the right time. How can we figure out what that is? And we always say, look to what works, use the 6 R's to figure out why the moments that work are working, and then use that to springboard into problem solving some more difficult or challenging moments. So that is really the framing of the 6 R's. We use it as a recipe card to sort of figure out, one, why we're amazing at what we do because educators need the cheerleading, and two, to try and intervention plan and problem solve with a bit of a frame.
And so I'll share our screen if that's okay, just to put the 6 R's up there.
Yeah, please.
But they are, to keep the suspense from you, they are relational, relevant, rewarding, rhythmic, repetitive, and respectful. And each of those words, I'm sure as you've heard them, everyone has an immediate, oh, I know what that means, or this is my definition. And so the cool thing that Dr. Perry has done with this work is to say, all of what he's put into this content, all of what Haley and I use on a day-to-day basis is really a teaching tool. And so with these 6 R's, we track it back to the brain. So we're saying, how do these 6 R's help us think about what's likely? Again, nothing's guaranteed, but what's going to be likely to have the best brain-based impact for this individual or this class or for myself. And so these 6 R's are what we kind of use as that recipe card. And so each of them has sort of a face value definition and then more of that brain-based definition. But we talked earlier about that developmental, sort of state. We don't know what stage every 12-year-old is in. They're going to be at a wide range of things. But if we look at what's relevant to an individual's development, we're going to be more likely to hit that right spot of development or the right skills or the right, intimacy level that's going to be safe and supportive.
Or just even like with relevant biologically, what is a relevant amount of time for kindergartners to sit on carpet? So we will observe in classrooms where elopement is one of the number one things, and they're asking for 20 minutes of carpet time. It's recommended in adult professional development that you let them move every 20 to 30 minutes. So if that's what we expect for 40-year-old brains, then what are we scaling back that's biologically relevant for 5 and 6-year-old brains and bodies? So we are always anchoring these to respectful and, relevant of the biological and developmental needs of ourselves and in the youth we work with. And relational, that's when I always was a very relational teacher. And then I got into this and I realized I was a relational as far as interpersonal with my students. My classroom was kind of chaotic. It was a little bit disorganized. My schedule was sort of, I think type B is what you might describe me as. And that's really unsafe for a lot of our students. Pick your own seat is one of the most unsafe things for a lot of children, for a lot of adults. Again, picture an adult professional development where you ask people to just sit wherever. Those front 3 tables are generally empty.
Every time they are. I can tell you.
We do all these things and that's because they're having a hard time relating to you as the presenter if they don't know you. They're trying to relate to the space. So with relational, it's like it is so beyond just that interpersonal. So this is a huge component of the training, but I think and respectful is one of those words that we always warn. There's a lot of bias in the word respect. There's a lot of bias in the word disrespect and defiance, because who gets to decide what's categorized under that? And so when we talk respect, we're talking respectful of biology and developmental level. So if we don't yet know letter sounds, is it respectful to consequence the inability to read a paragraph? No, we're going to back that up. We are going to teach at a respectful level of starting with letter sounds, building to words.
This is awesome. I'll circle back. I want to get to the next question, but believe it or not, I love it when this type of stuff happens. It's such a nice connection point, and it just makes me realize more and more how complementary I think the Y-Tri and the neurosequential model are. So we actually have a thing that we describe as like the foundation of our approach. We call it the new 3 Rs. There's a teaser. I'll circle back to it, but we use it as the foundation, but we don't have time to go and do as much detail as you've gone into behind the new 3 Rs. We jump kind of to the skills that complement that. I'll put those up in a little bit. But before we do that, I'm just gauging the time that we have left. I do want to talk a little bit about, I think one of the important questions that people have probably shown up for are, what are some strategies? So I love that model with the 6 Rs. I'm already like writing all sorts of notes to myself on it. But I think people are always curious. So if I'm viewing it through this lens, it's kind of this lens of understanding. And really, we talk a little bit about like just in general, this concept of the golden rule, like treat others the way I would like to be treated. But the golden rule really is a flawed rule. If I'm a hugger and I'm giving everybody hugs and I end up hugging the person that doesn't want to be hugged, they don't want to be treated the way that I want to be treated. So there is this like platinum rule that's not treat others how I want to be treated, but treat others how they want to be treated. And I think that seems like that is kind of driving the understanding behind the 6 Rs that you have, is really understanding what the specific language of regulation may be for each individual, for both the students and for ourselves as the grown-ups, and then really trying to be able, and that, I mean, ultimately that is relevance, right? That is what makes a thing relevant.
And you don't have to, I think it's one of those things Haley always does a good job of highlighting. It doesn't mean, if Jason needs hugs, you have to be a hugger, or if you need walks, I have to walk 30 miles with you. There's this, kind of give and take, but it is like you said, you have to be respectful of where people are. And we know the brain changes through repetition. So if if there are those appropriate and safe and supportive repetitions you want to offer to shift a lens. I think of students who come in and say caregivers are unsafe, or educative school is not for me. We don't want to say, okay, we're going to meet you there and never shift it, but we might over time, like you said, sort of say, all right, here's where they're starting. How do we dose in those little moments to create that shift to lead to that positive growth in a safe way?
I think when it comes to talking about regulation, there's all these great examples in the chat, like stretching, weightlifting, and Yes. And, if any of you Googled right now how to regulate my classroom or students, you'll find 1,000 curriculums and ideas and checklists and great ideas to pull from. But again, that can set up educators to be like, thank you for another thing to do, right? Thank you for now asking me to weight lift, to hug, to this, to that. And so what we really try to do when we, a big part of what Katie and I do with the neurosequential model in education is implementation, school-wide, district-wide, organization-wide implementation. And where that starts is saying that when we think about the lower part of the brain, the first part of our brain that really organized, the part that really controls regulation, because all it's thinking about is safe, neutral, or unsafe, that part of the brain doesn't respond to verbal, and it responds to a lot of things that we would do for an infant. And so with an infant, you're not like, listen, baby, weight lift and calm down, right? You say, I'm going to rock you. I'm going to pat you. I'm going to sing a lullaby to you over and over and over until I hear it in my sleep. And it's not that you care about the words of that lullaby. It's that you care about the pattern, the repetition, and the rhythm. I'm going to put you on a feeding schedule and a napping schedule. And I'm going to try and control sensory input in a way that makes you feel safe and calm. And I'm going to try to make life predictable for you. And when I introduce new adults, I'm going to make you feel safe before I hand you to them. And so that's all of this external pattern, repetition, rhythm, co-regulation, and then some more rhythm and some more predictability. And so when we focus on regulation, there are plenty of people to give you ideas for brain breaks and breathing and yoga ball and weightlifting, and that is all incredible. But I think where we're seeing education really move the needle is systems that say, how is this built into our schedule, into how we serve lunch, into how we talk to kids, how we greet them, how we talk about kids, I think, and how we plan for the adults. Because you called this out early on. Adults have such a sort of burden they're carrying in schools to do all this other big work. But if we haven't pre-planned for those moments of stress, then it becomes those who can, and those who can't. And that really ultimately has a trickle down that most negatively impacts the students, I think.
It was somebody put in the comment and in the chat when we were visiting earlier. I think it was Snehal. I hope I pronounced that right. But they put parent dysregulation equals child dysregulation. And I think the same thing applies in our classrooms as well. Like teacher dysregulation likely equals student dysregulation. And so an awareness, I think, is pretty important. Let's put this in classroom language then. Let's say that I am a novice on this. I haven't had the luxury of going through an NME training or going through a Y-Tri training, and I'm just hanging on by my fingernails, and I feel like it's been a rough year, and I feel like my class just is I'm barely maintaining some semblance of control, and it seems so dysregulated to me. What are some starting points? Where could I start just to try to provide a little more regulation or provide a space that regulation could take root a little bit better, if I'm in that position?
Okay. You're doing great.
Yeah, I'd say first off,
hold on with those fingernails.
Get a hug, or don't get one if it helps. But no, I think that the first thing we would say is it's working somewhere. We have been in so many classrooms, and it's never all bad. I really think if you're a good person, it's happening somewhere. So we would say use those 6 R's. Reach out to us. We'll send them to you. They're on the internet. Use those 6 R's and take a moment and celebrate what you're doing right first, because it's always easier to build skills in yourself and in others from a place of reward and what's already working and something that feels good. So I think take a moment and figure out what is the most rhythmic part of my day. I think about everyone's morning routine. Katie always jokes, we don't hide our coffee cups from ourselves in the morning to get ready for the real world. We try to make our morning as sort of patterned as we can so that it goes smoothly. And when somebody breaks our pattern or something happens or our kid can't find their shoe, it's really frustrating. We all get dysregulated. So, yep, just like the chat, plan intentionally. And so I think for me as a new teacher, that was really hard because I didn't know what I didn't know. Like I remember my class library was just, it was useless because it was messy and chaotic. And so one of the most helpful things was finally a senior teacher was like, can I redo your library? I said, yes, if you can redo it, I can manage it, but I'm not going to come up with a system. I need someone to model it for me. So I think being honest about what's going well and being honest about the places that you could just add very tiny doses of rhythm and predictability. So you won't fix it all. Look at your stressors, find one you think you can control, and add pattern, predictability, and rhythm, reduce novelty, and try to shift the stress from the red to the green is what we say.
And I think if you think about, a lot of folks who are at that point of, hanging on by our fingernails, everything starts to feel heavy and stressful. Yeah. So I think sometimes if we can, like Keely said, we call out what's going well because there is always something. I mean, every conversation we have with someone who's like, oh, it's been a day, they name amazing things they do. But I also think figuring out what are some of those things that maybe you're dreading a little bit or that are the biggest stressors. That might be a student, that might be a colleague, that might be a time of day, but also saying you've likely tried a lot of different things or you feel like you've tried a lot of things. So I'm not a group work person, but I've had to come to realize that that's likely when you need to turn to somebody else and say, I dread third period because of this reason or this activity. Do you have any ideas or would you come observe? I think so often when we observe, I recently was observing and realized how much a student was loving the teacher, but that love of the teacher was completely disruptive and felt dysregulating and all these things, but they needed a lens from someone else to start to help to peel it apart, to then troubleshoot so that when that moment happened, it wasn't like, I knew this shoe would drop and now it's happening and it's sending me over the edge. It's like, okay, I knew this could happen and I planned for it.
Love it. Go ahead.
I was just saying, just figuring out how to introduce that rhythm and not just musical, although that helps you. But, Jason, we speak sports a lot. And if there's one thing we know about good sports practice, it's that practice runs the same. And it's hard when we introduce a new drill. And you're not going to try to teach them a new play when you have 2 seconds on the clock. You better have practiced your 2-second play if you want that muscle memory to kick in. And so if you want to use a cozy corner, if you want to have a regulation activity, you have to practice that when you're in a good place in order to have that muscle memory to use it when you're in a tough place or a place of a lot of stress. Good stress, right? You're about to win the game. Stress nonetheless. We just met with a high school teacher this morning. They're getting ready for ACT, SAT, all that good stuff. We said, don't start doing your testing stuff the month of testing. You should practice that for months. So if you break up by A through L and L through Z, start doing that because there's going to be nothing more stressful for a bunch of high schoolers to sit next to kids they haven't met before and then try to focus on a test when there's a cute new classmate next to them, right? So practice that now. Practice like you want to play. Yeah. Give yourself the chance to have some of that muscle memory and emotional sort of memory of regulation in the moment for ourselves, for our students. And admin, we really say they have to support it because it takes trust to pause your lesson and regulate, to stop and meet your students developmentally. So if you are an administrator, model this and give permission to pause and be relevant.
I love that. We teach when we teach emotional regulation, and we're helping grown-ups try to teach that. And the practical approach to that is like realistically usually if a teacher says, I've got to help my students learn emotional regulation, what they're actually saying is, I've got to help my students stop having tantrums or stop having outbursts or stop having these shutdowns. And so, but the thing we describe when we're teaching it, we compare it just to what you said. We have regular muscle memory, right? If you write your name, if I tell you to write your name, you could do it with your eyes closed. And you could probably write your name. But if I have you put the pen or pencil in your opposite hand, the hand you never write with, and I say, write your name, you probably can't do it with your eyes closed. You have to look, and it takes real intentionality behind it. And so if the thing we're asking them to do, we haven't practiced or built up that emotional muscle memory for, they're not going to be prepared to do it. And it's going to be a much higher likelihood of failure or just lack of completion towards that thing because we haven't developed it. Back through the sports lens, we practice in practice so that we don't have to tell ourselves what to do in the heat of the competition. We just instinctively know what to do because it's the thing we've been practicing up to that point. And the same applies to our defense mechanisms and how we react. Can I practice a response to an event that elevates my emotion so that I instinctively react in a healthier way rather than leaning on my emotional muscle memory, which says every person in my life yells when they feel stressed out. And my whole life, if I'm a 12-year-old, for 12 years of my life, I've always yelled back when I feel stressed out. So now my emotional muscle memory is stress kicks in and I just yell. It's what I do. And so it becomes really, really hard. So we do. I love that idea of kind of intentional practice. Any other strategy you would add to the list?
I think this is tricky, and this was a place of hard learning for myself as an educator. But again, the science tells us that the brain wants to repeat things that are rewarding. So if we want a child to do something different, and we want ourselves to do something different, that has to be more rewarding than what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So if there is an incredible amount of reward in running out of the classroom because you get to physically regulate, you get to leave the environment of stress, and we think consequencing within the classroom is going to make staying in the classroom more appealing, we are continually cutting our own legs out from under us. So it is a hard mentality to switch when you have a student or another person who is making your life really stressful or challenging, to think, how can I reward them out of this situation? How can I take someone who's making my moment unrewarding and hard and make something so rewarding that they want to do it? So we see a lot of schools switching from a pull-out model to push in, because pulling out with the dean, even if that dean is reaming you, it's one-on-one attention and relational engagement. And for a lot of students, those 20 minutes they're in trouble is the most connected they feel in an entire day. And so we're saying, figure out how to push in, how to practice those skills within the classroom with someone safe, doing it in a proactive way. If we want a child to do better at recess, sitting out doesn't teach a single skill. Sitting out teaches that you don't belong in this community, and it is not going to get better for you. But also, now, having consequences, incredibly important. Consequences are one of the safest things we can offer people. Consequences can be rewarding. We don't have children sit out of reading because they can't read, because that would be ridiculous. We have children buried in literacy support, and we try to make it engaging. And I'm doing this because it's like, we want you to love reading so that you seek literacy. If we want social skills or behavioral skills to be something that people love and want to seek, we also have to make those rewarding. And we see a real fork in the road with behavioral and academic skills. Like, we want them to love reading. We want them to love math. So we're going to make it rewarding. We want them to behave. So we're going to make it really punitive and power heavy and, get them to comply. And what we talk about a lot in the neurosequential model is a state of compliance is generally fear-based, right? I knew with some of my students, if I was like, I'm going to call grandma, they would do what I wanted because they were terrified. I could pull that power and I could get compliance. But what I needed to realize is, as soon as I put them into that fear state where they're compliant, their functional IQ drops, their ability to process and store and hold memory changes. So I'm not giving them an equitable chance to learn in the same way as their peer who is in a state of regulation versus compliance. And it's hard. It is so hard. I can say that. And then I can also picture a child spitting on me and thinking, how do I reward you? No way. Not how do I reward you? How do I get away from you? And how do I make sure you feel my frustration was always my knee-jerk reaction, which is where we also really say adult co-regulation is crucial. And it's not losing your power to tap in a regulated adult when you are dysregulated. And that was very hard for, again, myself, I was like, I have to have the restorative. I have to blah, blah, blah.
I
But
think a big part of it, I mean, this is like the basic behavior as a model for changing behavior. A plus B equals C. Antecedent plus behavior equals consequence. If you want to change the B, the behavior, you either need to change the antecedent, the thing, the environment, the thing leading up to the behavior, or you have to change the consequence, the thing that results after. But the tricky part in a classroom and in education, just to validate anybody that thinks I was worried, like I've been doing it wrong, is the problem is the negative consequence usually gets the quicker behavior change. But as you pointed out, sometimes getting that behavior change does put a student in a place where they're no longer learning. So they may stop doing the thing that's bugging me or that's disrupting my class, but now they may no longer be in a state where they're actually learning anymore. Which is such a tricky thing. Katie, I think you had something you were going to say.
Well, I was just going to say, I think where we see sort of the tangible, how does that look in action is where we see the sticky spot is if we say, Haley keeps getting in trouble at recess, just go play. And Haley's repeatedly showing us she doesn't have the skills built to just go play. And then the appropriate response for an adult who has to survive in that setting can't be, well, then teacher Katie, go do one-on-one and lunch bunch with Haley and this whole ginormous intervention. What we can think about more is saying, how do we structure recess so that little Haley has some scaffold, some supports to learn to play in that setting where we're modeling, we're supporting, or building that in. And I think that's where when we start to see it, the adults and the system make a shift to say, if we're asking for a behavior, are we teaching a behavior and modeling it? It lightens the load on the adults, so their regulation's improved, and then it also supports the students. Because again, it's pleasurable to have someone facilitate a game at recess. That feels a lot safer than gray space. The amount of students we see who spend their whole recess trying to get out of recess because it's so unsafe is pretty substantial. But just those small doses of structure and safety built in make it easier for everyone, which is really where that shift happens.
And again, that is a consequence. If you are physically unsafe at recess, you don't get to just recess. Your consequence is recess looks different for you, but that is going to be patterned, predictable. It's not going to be adult dependent on your consequence. You are going to know what it's going to be. It's going to have this rewarding relational element, and it's probably not going to physically restrain movement.
I think it warrants, and I'm going to put up my list I told you I was going to. I think it really does warrant like a real multisensory and experiential approach to education, because I think in a lot of cases that basis of regulation then increases the likelihood of the learning, which is the thing we want. Here's the 3 R's that I think are really complementary and have a nice overlap with yours. We go relationship plus relevance, and then that equals resilience, which is kind of this shift in how a person responds to challenge or adversity. And then the skills that I'll share with you, kind of the 10 skills of resilience. And we know that there's more than this, but this is where we start. We teach decision making and consequences. We teach positive self-image, emotional regulation, motivation and a resilient mindset, peer influence, positive relationships, problem solving, hard work and determination, responsibility and self-discipline, support systems, relationship building, and then future-ready vision and self-efficacy. Those are all like key ingredients towards resilience. But the goal is, and this is where I think, I think the NME model really, really has it. And I encourage anybody to dig deeper into this model. I'm going to put contact info up for Haley and Katie in just a minute. But when we teach this, we recommend this activity-based approach where we're doing activities, we're watching video clips, we're processing both individually and as a group, and try to create this multi-sensory experience to it. And I think it works because it does provide that space for regulation. But talk about a game changer if you can have the model for regulation that I think NME is really masterful at helping understand better. Haley, Katie, give us a teaser. So we're out of time, basically. We did not even get into adult regulation or teacher or educator regulation. Give us a little bit of teaser because I've already asked you two to continue the discussion with me here in a future month. But talk a little bit about, just very briefly, give us a little teaser of why the adult regulation piece is important and maybe how it's a thing that we easily lose track of when we're so focused just on student regulation. And I'm going to put up contact info while you're talking about that.
I mean, we always say adults control the weather, right? So power, Dr. Perry teaches us in the neurosequential model that power sets the direction of contagion. So if the educator is dysregulated because they hold the power in the classroom, that is going to transfer to the students. It makes us feel unsafe if the people we're looking to just sort of control things feel, I don't know if anyone's ever watched a public speaker who is incredibly nervous. You get incredibly nervous watching their incredibly nervous presentation. It's I always call it like that secondhand embarrassment. And so if we want educators to be able to co-regulate or model regulation, they need to be as close to a place of regulation as possible. We can't put it on them. Oh, self-carry yourself into this better place. Just put on a smile and fake it. Again, we look to systems and policies that say we're not changing the curriculum every 5 minutes to stress you out. We're going to have predictable communication and use of email as a staff. Our professional development is going to be driven by adult data that says this is what we need and this is why we need it, and we're going to meet you. We're going to offer you things like why try. That isn't just this sit and get, but it's interactive learning. It models the way we want to teach. I really just think it's taking better care of our educators so that they stick around and they feel valued and they can celebrate themselves.
Yeah. And I think it's being playful. And a big part of what we see is that adults get really good at surviving and charging through. And so a big part of this is, Dr. Perry is always pushing us to get simpler, simple, small moves. But I think one of the biggest, simple, small moves, the intervention we can all put into place for ourselves for the next 2 weeks is watch your state. When you are feeling that dysregulation, what led to it? What did you innately do? You called out that we default to those practice behaviors. Dr. Perry talks about that all the time. And so what are we defaulting to? And is it what we want to be defaulting to? Or are there those little shifts we can make or we can seek support around? So that awareness piece is much more impactful with adults because part of the way we charge through is by sort of squishing that down. Yeah.
Really, really insightful. If anybody hits that QR code, I'll be happy to commit. We're more than happy to share a free lesson plan for how you can try to teach some students some strategies and use a visual metaphor approach to help them. I'm also going to share. I'll make sure that Katie and Haley have everybody's info as well. And if you want to get a hold of them, you can reach out on socials, or you've got an email address there to reach out. Huge thank you, Katie and Haley. You always bring such great content. Let's end on this note. Tell me one thing that is making you feel hopeful right now about the state of education and the current state of the educators that you have the opportunity to engage with.
I mean, being in classrooms makes me feel hopeful. Just getting to observe, seeing kids in halls, looking at their art on walls. I think it's easy to get, I guess, unhopeful until you watch students in class, and that almost always brings you back. They love their teachers and they love school for the most part, and I think, I like to focus on that. The Olympics make me hopeful. I love watching those.
Nice.
So, yeah, I would say the same. And just we're at an exciting point in the year where people are planful. So they're thinking about next year. They're excited. And that gives me hope. They're like, what is the data? Is what we're doing working? Even if it's through a critical lens, it shows they want to do more and they want to do better. So that makes me really excited.
I love it. Rachel, thanks for sharing that in the chat. I'm hopeful for you as well. I hope it continues.
Yeah.
I'm similar to you. Haley, I was just down in Texas outside of Houston last month, and I do trainings in a lot of spaces, but every now and again, the training space is like in one of the schools. And in this, I was in New Caney, just north of Houston, and I was training in a training annex that's part of the high school. And to get to the training, I had to walk through the high school, and they had all this student art on the walls. And I remember looking at the art, and it was so inspiring, and it just reminded me like young people are incredible. You know, they're doing incredible things. They're going to do incredible things. They're going to solve some of the problems that they inherit from the grown-ups right now. Yeah. And then I went into the training, and I had a group of counselors down there that were just incredible humans as well, that are just doing the good work and showing up every day, you know, in an increasingly complex educational environment, and doing the good work because of how deeply committed they are to trying to support students and the people around them. And so it's similar for me. I always feel very inspired by the when I get to interact with the people out there doing it, including the students. Um, Deborah, if you want that email, you can hit that info@ytry.org. Just let us know you were in the webinar today, or you can email me direct, deborah.jason@ytry.org, and I'll be happy to make sure we get you some resources. And then if you have any other questions, reach out. But let's give a huge round of applause to our panelists, Haley and Katie, representing the neurosequential model in education. Give yourselves, attendees, a round of applause for showing up. Really insightful comments in the chat. Always appreciate you. And then to close things out, I'm just going to play us out with some music, and thank everybody for showing up. Next week, I'm going to have on the webinar representatives from the National Alternative Education Association, 3 principles, and we're going to talk about belonging and the concept of belonging and how to help students feel a greater sense of belonging. I'm really excited for it. Had a great planning discussion today. That'll be next Thursday, so mark your calendars. And with that, go have a great afternoon, everybody. Thanks for showing up.
Thank you all for what you do. Please don't hesitate to reach out. We are happy to support you. To our Coloradoans, hello from Golden.